Oh,
Okay. Item 4, presentation on climate changes impacts to the town of Kennebunkport. I'm going to pass it over to you, Lori.
so before we get started, I just got to promote some people. So I'm going through the list here. I figured it was just as easy for me to promote them. Are people coming forward? Here we go. I'm looking for Werner. I promoted Abby. Is Abby going to join us? There she is. And Werner. Is that everyone? I believe so. So who I've just promoted on my screen, first on the left is Corinna, and you've met Corinna before. She is our regional sustainability resilience coordinator with the 6 towns with Southern Maine Planning and Development. Leah Lowry, who is with the Kennebunkport Conservation Trust and Kennebunkport Climate Initiative. And Abby Sherwin, who also is a senior planner at Southern Maine Planning and Development, and Werner Gilliam. You all know Werner as the Director of Planning and Codes. And I don't see Tom here. So what I asked them to do this evening is, over the past few years, we have been discussing the impacts of climate change and how that would particularly impact Kennebunkport. We have taken some first steps. So these individual steps have been things like some of our infrastructure projects, so the Ocean Avenue seawall project that we just did along Ocean Avenue is one of those. We have been looking at the Cape Porpoise Pier and the need to change that. We've integrated it into our planning for our wastewater pump stations and infrastructure. We also have been talking about how it will change the community in the future. And the comp plan, for example, the comp plan committee is currently working to integrate climate change into the chapters in the new comp plan. And as such, we also have been thinking about the fact that we don't have a real strategic plan in regards to climate change and also sustainability and resilience of our community. So what I'm looking to do is for us to have a more structured and strategic plan moving forward. And I have asked Corinna and Leah and Abby to begin tonight by giving an overall presentation of what that means here in Kennebunkport and what actions we may choose to take going down the road and who might be our partners moving forward. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Leah first, and she's going to be sharing her screen and starting the presentation.
Can you guys see my screen?
We can.
All right, so let me get it up to. All right, so we kind of worked together to create this slideshow, and I'm going to go through some real basic stuff in the beginning, and a lot of you guys already know a lot of this, so I know I don't have to talk too much. But just for those of you who don't know me, I've been the Director of Education at the Kennebunkport Conservation Trust for the past 10 years, and now have, through that work, have been funded to start the Kennebunkport Climate Initiative. So it's very exciting for the town of Kennebunkport, I think, and for myself as well. But I just want to start with getting to the very basics, and that is sort of talking a little bit about climate change and the basics of the science. So essentially, There's a change over a long average period of time that is warming our planet. And there are greenhouse gases that are getting trapped in the atmosphere. The most famous one that everybody knows about is carbon dioxide, which comes from our fossil fuels and that sort of thing. But as that starts to build up in our atmosphere, it's creating hotter and hotter climates. And essentially from 2009 to 2019, we've had 9 out of those 10 years, 9 of them have been the hottest recorded since we've been recording temperatures. So it's just showing that we are trending in that direction. So the greenhouse gases that we have to really pay attention to are carbon dioxide, which is really our fuel emissions. That's the most of that comes from coal, natural gas, things like that. Methane, which can come from our agricultural practices, as well as rotting food. So those of us who have kids who never eat leftovers, we have to think about that a little bit more. But it also comes from decomposition of plant matter and things like that. So landfills, things of that nature create a lot of methane. And methane actually can be a little scarier than carbon dioxide in that it can create 25 times the amount of warming effect that carbon dioxide can, except for that it lasts shorter period of time in the atmosphere. So nitrous oxide is released from a lot of agricultural practices. Turning over the soils releases nitrous oxide. Human activities, like 40% of nitrous oxide comes from human activities. So things like livestock manure and the way that we treat that as it sits lower and lower in the bottom and it doesn't get any oxygen, it turns into nitrous oxide. So then it starts to leach out. So we have these are the major gases, and then the fluorinated gases. Those of you who are old like me remember chlorofluorocarbons and the ozone layer getting depleted, and those have now actually gotten a lot better and our ozone is coming back. So these are our major greenhouse gases, and what that does is it creates this layer of in our atmosphere that doesn't allow for the heat to leave. So what is sort of the problem with all of that? Well, climate change, those excess gases insulates the planet. So anybody who has ever tried to wear a big, thick winter jacket on one of those really hot, humid days in Maine, that's pretty much what we're doing to the planet. It's as though we have created an insulated blanket around the planet, which is heating. And the warmer it gets, the more our land ice melts, which is creating even more warming. So, and as well as sea level rise. So as the ice melts, and I've heard a lot of people say, but Leah, if I have a glass of ice water, and as the ice melts, it doesn't come out of my glass. So therefore I don't believe in this. But what you have to remember is that's sea ice. So if I were to fill my glass already up full with icy water and then try and throw more ice in it, it will overflow. So that's kind of the difference between those two. So the land ice is melting into the ocean. And then on top of that, this is kind of a double whammy. Not only is it raising the ocean levels, but it's also creating a warmer surface. So white and lighter surfaces reflect light and heat, and darker surfaces absorb it. So as that snow and ice is melting, our land is actually heating up because the darker surfaces underneath are starting to show more. So then it just makes it heat up even faster and faster and faster and kind of compounds the effect. That's called the albedo effect. But so as that ice leaves, and today a report came out that Greenland is pretty much past the point of return. So we are expecting Greenland's ice sheet to completely melt at this point. The oceans have already absorbed 90% of the excess heat in the atmosphere, which is actually also affecting some of the sea level rise effects that we see, and that's through thermal expansion. So as those molecules heat up, they get bigger and bigger and bigger, causing expansion of the
ocean. So not only are we having the land ice melting, but we're also having up more, which is making them expand. So that's also where some of that sea level rise comes from. Because it is also absorbing all of those greenhouse gases down into the water, it's creating an acidic effect, which is causing some acidification of our oceans. So those of you guys who are lobstermen, and I know we have two right here, you guys may notice with shellfish and lobster, the thinning of the shells, and that is from acidity building up. All right, so what changes are you guys seeing? I really want you to think for a second, because even if you're not attributing it to necessarily climate change, you are seeing changes in our local landscape. It's hard not to, whether it's from increased storms, whether it's higher tides, whether it's warmer winters, warmer summers. I know I never pulled my air conditioning out my entire childhood, and then now every summer I'm pulling it out more and more often. So think about it for a quick second and just think about what are some of the changes that you might be seeing around town, and really take a second to think about that.
Well, we've definitely got higher tides.
Higher tides.
Definitely.
Anybody seeing strange fish?
No? Just those jellyfish, those big jellyfish.
Jellyfish.
The lion jellyfish, or what they call, whatever they're called. The
Yeah,
big,
they're huge.
huge ones.
Yeah.
That
I
we-
never saw those as a kid. I saw the small jellyfish.
We just started seeing them this last couple of years. And they're very, very poisonous, or very stinging it's very painful.
Yeah, we didn't have to worry about, I don't remember ever worrying about that growing up, being
No.
stung by jellyfish around here.
Yeah. Well,
Well, I remember the jellyfish when I was a kid, but they weren't like these. These
It
are
didn't
huge.
sting as much though.
The pink
I don't
ones,
know.
the pink ones did.
these are
I
big.
guess that's true.
Yeah.
So we are seeing some differences, whether it's higher tides, whether it's different fish. We've always had white sharks off of our coast. We've rarely had them come so close in. And so some of that has to do with seal populations, and some of that has to do with our rising temperatures. Some of the accounts from lobstermen, and you guys would know better than me because I'm not a lobsterman, but that the lobster are going further and further out to find colder waters. So some of the problems that we're going to start seeing in southern Maine are listed right here, but a sea level rise. And interestingly enough, because of the currents and because of where we are located, our sea level rise will actually be higher than it is anywhere else on the East Coast. Lucky us. We are also warming faster than 99% of the bodies of water the same size in the world. So the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than 99% of the bodies of water its size in the world. So our waters are getting warmer, they're getting higher, and we also, as the Northeast, we are warming faster than any other region in the contiguous United States. So we're going to see higher temperatures, shorter winters, longer summers, hotter days.
That a bad?
Yeah, I'm sorry, what?
Is that a bad thing?
Well, it depends on how you want to look at it. I know everybody says that. So there are some good things about looking a little more like New Jersey, and then there are some struggly things too. But so we're going to end up with some more extreme weather because these warmer temperatures, there's more and more absorption of water into the air. So what that causes is it's an odd thing to think about, but it causes both flooding and drought at the same time. Because the warmer air is starting to absorb more and evaporate more, the air is fuller. So when we have those rainstorms, they are much more severe. They drop more water and they are causing more flooding. And then on top of that, because we are having longer drought periods, we are actually seeing some of our water tables go down. So this summer we had a longer drought period than normal. So we're going to start seeing some more of this extreme weather, both with flooding and with droughts. As that water table comes up in the ocean side too, like if you ever go down to Portland by Whole Foods on a really rainy day, it's all that ocean water is starting to back up into the drains, into the manhole, like the storm sewers, and then it's backing up and coming into the streets even far inland versus just right on the water. So we're starting to see some of that flooding effect. We're going to see decreased snowpack, which that affects our rivers. And those of you who are fishing out on our rivers, this is going to affect the fish populations as well as recreation. It also, we're seeing an increased ocean acidification, which again, we talked about that with shellfish and the loss of biodiversity as well. The loss of biodiversity through invasive species. Anybody out on Langsford Road see the huge patches of Phragmites that's taking over our marsh grasses. Our marshes are actually nurseries for so many of our small fish and shellfish that it's really hard to lose those. They also are they combat sea level rise because they can absorb so much of that to avoid flooding over the roads. With Phragmites taking over, it doesn't absorb as much and it's not as biodiverse, meaning that our fish populations and our shellfish populations are going to start to struggle because they won't have that nursery for them to stay in. We also see invasive species like the green crab. We see invasive species like tunicate. And those are just our aquatic ones. When you come inland, we have buckthorn and Japanese knotweed, which is now all over the sides of the roads. And then we have bittersweet, which is starting to climb up the trees and choke them out. If you go down by Kennebunk Beach, you'll see that as you go in through those neighborhoods that are lining the beach. So we're starting to see some huge issues and we're starting to see it right here. So yes, we will have a little bit warmer winter, but unfortunately with that, it brings some other stuff. And oh, I forgot to mention the ticks. How many of us are either know somebody who's suffering from Lyme disease? It's becoming more and more common because our winters are shorter and shorter. And so their lifespan is longer and longer and they're able to reproduce more. So we're going to be seeing an increase in things like that, as well as mosquito populations that have triple E and those kinds of things. The bugs like the higher temperatures. So what are we going to do about this? Well, here's the thing. I think we've been talking about climate change and changing climates since I was in middle school and I'm old. And actually the whole greenhouse gas thing came up in the 1800s. In 1850s, they discovered the greenhouse effect. And then by the late 1800s, they figured out why it was starting to happen. So we've known about it for a long time, but why have we sort of argued it or not been able to make any changes? And I think some of that is because we're all coming at it from different points of view. So ultimately, unless we look at this from all the points of view that affect every single person, we're not going to be able to come to a sustainable solution. So we have to look at the ecological effects. And these are the things like the invasive species, like the marshes disappearing, like the fishing industry starting to struggle. We have to look at the economic effects. These are the things like the tax dollars we collect from the larger houses that are right on the seaside, right, that are going to start losing their value because they're going to flood more and more often. Or the dying fishing, industry, not dying, but it's starting to struggle, right? The sociocultural, our way of life. So many of the things that we identify with as Mainers and so many of the ways that we traditionally live are really threatened by some of the things that are happening in the environment right now. So we have to start looking at things from all different points of view in order to really come up with a sustainable solution. Because if it pleases us economically, but then we suffer ecologically or socioculturally, it's not going to help us any. Or if we sacrifice everything to ecologically solve a problem, but our economy suffers, or we are suffering our traditions and things that we really value and hold dear, it's not going to be sustainable. So we've got to find a place where everything lines up together. So some of the things facing Maine in general, and I've kind of talked a lot about this, so I don't want to continue to be like the Debbie Downer here, but if you look at the state of Maine, where the most population is where we are. So more people are going to be affected. Also, one of the big things about where we're located, lucky us, is we have all those great big huge sandy beaches. They're wonderful, except for when it comes to sea level rise, because the high craggy shores actually are protecting towns on them. We don't have that luxury. We're right on the ocean. So, and there's not a whole lot in between us and those rising tides. So we are seeing some of that. As flood insurance increases, we're noticing less and less people are getting flood insurance. That's a huge economic impact, because as those houses are damaged, who's paying for that? It comes down to us, right? If the taxpayer is going to have to cover some of those damages, or the town is covering some of those damages. Shorefront home devaluation is going to become an issue in the future. So also, the last thing economic wise is we are 46th in the nation for economic growth, and we depend so much on some of those seasonal incomes. So think of Sugarloaf and decreased snowpack. That's going to affect the economy of that community severely. Our community, we are a huge summer tourism beachfront community, and we're going to be affected deeply by some of these changes as well. Ecologically, our water quality is going to start to be challenged. As these sea levels rise, we're going to be inundated by salt water. And so what of our infrastructure systems are down on there? And then if those houses end up crashing into the oceans, then we have raw sewage crashing into our oceans. We have all of the pollutants of a home. Think about everything that's in your home going in or crashing in, and that affects the health of our fisheries. It affects the health of us. So we have to, and the health of all of the wildlife. So thinking about the ecological side, right? And then the sociocultural, I already mentioned this, the threat to our traditional way of life. We definitely have a way that we do things and a way that we view ourselves, and that is kind of threatened, as well as the public access to land and fresh water. The increased tick and mosquito population, like I mentioned, as well as the burden of a cost shift is going to have some severe equity issues. One of the students that I teach said, well, I really don't care about all those people from away that are living on the coast. In fact, when I said invasive species, they said, oh, are you meaning the people who are visiting here? And I said, no. So, but we are going to see a shift in cost to those people who have moved away from the coast because they think it's too expensive. And if they think it's too expensive to live there now, when those tax dollars no longer are as viable as they are now, that burden is going to shift onto those people who already are feeling a squeeze. So how are we going to manage that piece? There's a whole equity piece in there. So I'm going to talk a lot about sea level rise, because I do think that that's one of the major things that affects us in our community, especially in Kennebunkport. When you look at Cape Porpoise, you look at the islands, you look at Dock Square, so much of our, obviously, and our properties at the trust are very much on the ocean. So these are the NOAA's projected sea level rises. And as you can see, it shows a wide variety. If you look at the low and intermediate low, so that blue and green line, we can count on that at this point, because that was our projected outcome if we stopped emissions by the year 2020. We haven't done that. So if you look at these, we can plan on this level of sea level rise pretty sturdy. Like, we know that this is most likely baked in and we can't do much about it. The others are much more extreme. Right now, what they're saying to look at is the intermediate and the intermediate high as our projections. So if you look at this, this screen, these are just for Portland. And if you look at Portland in 2030, if you look, I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but if you look in around here, That's saying that we are going to be projected at about 5 inches increase in 2030. If you look at 2040, it's close to 9.5 inches. And on this red line, which is pretty close to where we are, this is just the variance that it can be depending. In 2050, they're looking at a 15-inch rise. So we are pretty much set to see a 15-inch sea rise. So is sea level rise an issue for us right now? We're number 5 in the top 20 towns affected by sea level rise. And Lori was lovely enough to share this video. I don't know if you can even recognize it. It took me a minute to figure out where it was actually.
Up to the river.
Bunk Beach.
It is. I'm going to see if it will play. Can you guys see it playing?
Mhm.
So if you look where the jetty is, and this is not even with sea level rise, right? This is just a storm surge. So when I talk about that, when I talk about that 15 inches of sea level rise, that's without a storm surge. So imagine this with another 15 inches. And it sounds small. It's not small. That's just a regular storm surge, right? Well, we're seeing higher storm surges.
When was that taken?
Lori, when was that? That was
March 3rd, 2018.
yeah. Was that Riley?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is also Riley in 2018. This is the public access to Goose Rocks Beach. Here you got down at Arundel Wharf. Here's Ocean Avenue. So we're seeing this already without this kind of sea rise, right? We're seeing the storm surges really affecting the infrastructure of our community. This is the Spirit of Massachusetts last year during that huge storm that actually pulled it off its mooring.
No, that was a tree.
Oh, the tree that came down, you're right.
Yeah.
That was not the storm.
That was the tree that came down. This one was just in April 9th of this year during a king tide. And that's down in Dock Square. That was April 9th. So that was a simple king tide. There was no storm there. This one Abby actually shared, and I'm going to do my best to speak to it, but this is essentially talking about this shows the erosion, basically the soil erosion and accretion on the whole coast of Goose Rocks Beach and the overall erosion. And as sea levels rise, and as those storms become more intense, as we are seeing, those storms are going to start to erode our beaches even more. So Abby, I don't know if you want to add any more to that or not.
No, I think you did a great job, Leah. The only thing I would add is just that, we're all already seeing variability and significant changes from year to year and even from season to season. And the rate of erosion is already increasing overall along Goose Rocks Beach, and with increased sea level rise and stronger storms, the rate of erosion will likely increase. And so that means the beach is likely to diminish from year to year in the future.
We do have people who do beach monitoring, and actually the students that I work with are doing beach monitoring on Goose Rocks Beach every single month and are adding to this data that you see in front of you, which is fantastic that we have students in our community that are excited to do this for us. So I have 3 different views of Kennebunkport that I want to share with you. And this right here, as you can tell, this is sort of the islands. You can see Pier Road right here just to get your bearings. And this is kind of where we are right now. And this is with the low sea level rise. And this is with intermediate high. So this is what we are thinking that we are going to see in 2100. This is what we're thinking we're going to see in 2050. And you can see already, like, where Marshall Point is in rough shape. You've got Pier Road is being inundated, which we're seeing already now.
Where are you seeing that at Pier Road?
Right here,
Causeway,
Other than the
it's the
cause?
causeway.
the
Yeah.
causeway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that looks like your house, Mike.
And
where
then
she's
right
got the
here-
cursor.
People keep talking about this, but I'm telling you, and I believe in climate change, but so far, we have not seen it as affecting this end of Pier Road.
Yes,
So,
I,
no.
I,
When we have a storm, sometimes the island that I own out back, the peninsula I have out back, floods over, but that always has since we've lived here. We've lived here 20 years. So we have not seen it. There has occasionally there's a breach over here where they're building the new house, but the water never comes very far. And so we haven't seen it. Out back, we see it a little bit, but not much. The April, the Patriots Day storm, yep, that was big. Riley was, we didn't have a lot of problem with that. So, but the causeway floods regularly.
so that is this picture right here, because this is where you are right now, Mike. So you're right. You're not having those issues yet
No, we're
at
not.
all.
Well,
But
we
with,
expect it. We expect it.
but with, if we get that 15 inches that they are expecting, you're going to be here.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm 75 years old.
I would hope that my kids don't have to deal with it.
I agree. I agree.
And
with
this
that.
is the extreme scenario, and you know, I threw it in there, but it's that this is what they're saying. If nobody does anything by the year 2100, if we don't decrease emissions, but we are starting to decrease some. So, but if we do nothing at all, we will have a 10.9 foot increase in sea
I
level rise.
agree. I agree with you.
I'm going to buy a Tesla. I'm going to do my part.
Well, you
Hey,
are
don't
seeing,
laugh. I'm going to buy one.
Hey,
you are
Lisa,
seeing a lot of different electric cars, electric trucks. They're talking about really soon.
Technology will solve this problem. I mean, this is the
Electric-
first problem.
Electric
that's-
I'm
tractor
going to get
trailers.
to that in a second. I'm going to get
Yeah.
to the technology
And
piece.
I'd like to address a couple things because I was actually a guest speaker at a climate change symposium about 4 years ago for a collection of grad students that were all marine biology students, and they did it. It was actually a pretty interesting symposium because they did it in a bar room of all places up in Portland. I can't remember the name of the place, but everybody was pretty loose and it was a good thing. And I was the last speaker of the night, and I introduced myself and I said, and I'm a Republican, and they all looked at me and I said, but I'm not here to tell you about whether what's happening, what's causing all this. That's for you to decide. You're scientists. But I have seen changes in the Gulf of Maine, but I do disagree respectfully, Leah, with what you say about the lobsters. That is simply not true. Lobsters have expanded their range. They have not moved away from the shore.
So
As
they
the
have,
Gulf of Maine has warmed up, and it's actually benefited most of us as lobstermen because,
it has in recent years, but if you look at the trends from the Cape,
you can't take the Cape because that is a totally
Okay.
different fishery, and you go 5 miles offshore and you're in 10 fathom of water. That's 60 feet. You go 5 miles offshore here and you're in 200 to 300 feet of water. What's going on in Cape Cod, you cannot extrapolate to the Gulf of Maine. It is not the Gulf of
Okay.
Maine. Ocean
I'm not gonna
acidification
argue-
is not. So what I'm saying here is I want everybody to take all this, and I'm not trying to be combative, and I know that this sometimes people want to make it political, and I'm not trying to do that, but I think what you're doing here is preaching a lot of doom and gloom, and you're not the only one who does this. Ocean acidification that is not what is causing shell disease in lobsters. Nobody knows exactly what is causing it, but they don't believe it's ocean acidification. I've read far more about this than anybody.
so if you will let us finish, I think you'll see that we're not preaching doom and gloom. I just want
Well,
to show
so far,
these
so far you're doing a good
projections.
job of it,
So
Leah.
far I am. I totally know. And that's what I said. I've got the hard part in the beginning, but if you
And
just can
I
hold
listened
on.
on NPR of all things one day. There was a woman on there talking, a young woman who was very passionate about this, and I appreciate people's passion about this. And she said when she talks to people like me, they just throw up their hands like, you say all of these things, and if they are true, or even if half of them are true, people are like, what am I going to do? There's nothing you can do.
So
No matter what you listen to, there seems to be no solutions.
Well, we
There
ought to let her
are
finish her program.
solutions.
We
Okay.
really should let her finish her
There
program.
are solutions. I understand that what I'm saying, people can disagree with it. It's fine. I will say that we are seeing the oceans rise. We are seeing them warm, and we are going to see different trends. That is the science. That is
I have
NOAA,
no
that
doubt
is-
things are going on.
So,
in the
so
ocean.
I'm not, so let me, I'm just going to finish this piece, and I totally respect your thoughts and your knowledge on this. And that's where everybody needs to come to the table and have a conversation. So if you just let me finish, I promise it's not all doom and gloom.
Okay.
All right. So here is, this part is doom and gloom, and I acknowledged it from the get-go. So this is what we're looking at for Goose Rocks Beach, right? So this is where we are right now. This is 2030 with the projected sea level rise. And then this would be 2100 with the projected sea level rise. So as you can see, we're going to have to start thinking about that infrastructure of the roads through the beachfront. This again is, this is what they are saying if we do nothing, but I also think that this isn't where we're going to end up. So this is Dock Square, same scenarios, right? So this is going to be 2030 with the low, an intermediate low. And then you've got, or this is where we will end up. And then this is of course the extreme. But if you go back to the 2100 here, there are some places that need to be considered. And if you're thinking about even just the storm surges we are seeing now, there are places in Dock Square that are getting continually inundated that weren't previously in previous years. So it is something that needs to be considered when you're talking about infrastructure.
I think it's been more frequent in the last 5 to 10 years
Yes.
on the Ocean Avenue, down by where all the stores are and everything down through there. I think
Yeah.
that's a low spot, and I've noticed, I have a piece of property there, and I've noticed it in the last, I've owned it now, I think 7 years. And I've noticed that it's been a little more extreme than it had been in the past when Sonny owned it.
Leah, when 7 or 8 years ago, I went to Southern Maine Planning, Regional Planning Commission, and I don't know, the other organization had a presentation over at the church in Biddeford Pool. And it was really eye-opening back then. So this is quite a while, might have been even 10 years ago, where they showed where the road at Biddeford Pool would be gone, Wells Beach, et cetera. I don't remember the years, but the thing that strikes me about your presentation is that, first of all, I agree that there's a lot of causes of climate change. I'm not a political person when it comes to that. It's just I can see it, and what you're showing is identical to what was shown 10 years ago. So my point is that the science has been consistent.
Yes. And so one of the things that we are starting to see, if you look at Hurricane Sandy in New Jersey that wiped out their community, they actually got this amazing grant and rebuilt and have all sorts of catchments and adaptations for their community to live with the inundation of water. And so there are a lot of, there's an increase of knowledge about how to do infrastructure or how to create stronger infrastructure to live with water and move that forward. So there are a lot of ways that we can prepare. And the best thing in the world is to have early action, because frankly, the damages and replacing after damages is going to cost us a whole lot more than protecting in the future. It's kind of the same. I mean, protecting in the current time, it's kind of the same thing in my mind as insurance, right? Like I can have insurance and I pay for it a little bit now, but it helps me when that devastation happens. So basically, how do we move forward? And this is going to be more of the positive stuff. I got stuck with the negative stuff, but I do have some positive things to say at the very end. But right now, how do we move forward? I'm going to pass it off to Corinna and Abby.
All right, thanks for having us again. It's good to see everyone. And thank you, Leah, for giving that overview of climate change impacts in Kennebunkport. So as Leah mentioned, climate change is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. So when we're thinking about 2050 or 2100, besides sea level rise, we should also be thinking about what do we want our community to look like? Where do we want Kennebunkport to be? And what sort of life do we want for the residents and visitors of the community? Because though climate change is a challenge, it's also an opportunity that if we can address climate change in a proactive and in a flexible way, we can create a more sustainable and resilient future for Kennebunkport that's better for all the residents and the people who visit. And so what do I mean by sustainable? Leah, if you want to move it forward. She kind of mentioned this, and this is again the same Venn diagram. But by sustainability, it's when a healthy environment, economic prosperity, and social justice are pursued simultaneously to ensure the well-being and quality of life of both the present and future generations. And so climate change is interacting with many of the challenges that we face that sustainability addresses, whether that's impacts on our local tourism industry, impacts on public health through heat and disease threats, or the habitat degradation we see in our community due to different issues. But by approaching climate change through this sustainability lens, we can actively tackle those challenges and at the same time be encouraging a healthier and safer, flourishing Kennebunkport. And in addition to increasing sustainability, climate change action is also an opportunity to increase the resilience of the community. And to talk about that, I'm going to turn it over to Abby.
Can I ask a question first, just before you start? Maybe Abby will answer it. But in reading what I've read and listening to you people, 2030 to 2050 right now, if you listen to the scientists, is a foregone conclusion. Is that correct? Because it takes, if we take a lot of actions and so forth, it's going to take more than 10, maybe 15 or 20 years to turn it around. Is that correct?
Yes, that's it. What the changes we're seeing right now in the climate and its impacts have been locked in for the past few decades. So even if we were to stop today emitting carbon dioxide, we would still slowly see the impacts of what we're doing today in the future as the climate and the environments respond.
Yeah, so my point is that we've got to take a Netherlands mentality to a lot of things.
Yeah, that's why, and we'll get to this in a second in the presentation.
Okay, I'll shut up.
No problem. Abby, do you want to go ahead with the community resilience aspect?
Yes, thank you, Karina, and thank you, Leah, for advancing the slides. So going hand in hand with sustainability is this concept of community resilience, and resiliency has become a buzzword as of late. But when we are talking about resiliency, we're really talking about the resilience of a community to absorb, withstand, recover from, and adapt to disturbances while still being able to perform key functions, structures, and performances, and provide the services that all of community members rely on and count on for normal day-to-day life. And like the sustainability Venn diagram that Karina and Leah showed, it does involve sort of all dimensions, all aspects of a community. So we're not just talking about social resilience. We're not just talking about the resilience of infrastructure to withstand storm impacts. We're talking about every aspect of the community. So the social aspect, the natural environment, the built environment, as well as the economy. So really focusing on, again, touching back on something Leah presented, how can we develop solutions that benefit every aspect of the community? And that is building community resilience. Oh, Leah, can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So when we talk about climate change, we also talk a lot about climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And these terms can be somewhat confusing and used interchangeably. But just to sort of sort out what we mean when we're talking about these key terms, is mitigation is really an action to reduce the emissions that cause climate change. So actions that address the drivers of climate change, what is causing climate change. And I know there are some folks who disagree with what is causing climate change or the drivers, but there are some facts that we know. So as Leah presented, we know that increased carbon is leading to a warmer global temperature and global climate. So when we talk about climate mitigation actions, what we mean are things like moving to sustainable transportation. So maybe vehicles that run on electricity rather than gasoline. We're talking about clean energy and energy efficiency. Adaptation, on the other hand, is really actions to manage the impacts of climate change. So not the drivers of climate change, but what we see as impacts as a result of climate change. And those sorts of actions include things like disaster management, flood preparation and protection, and upgrading infrastructure to withstand different climate impacts. And then there are actions that overlap with both mitigation and adaptation. Things like promoting local food is an example of something that overlaps, because when we have local food sources, we are not sort of importing food from far away. So our carbon footprint is getting reduced because there's no transportation cost or carbon emissions associated with delivering the food to where we need it to be. And it's also considered an adaptation strategy because folks have better access to and can better control sort of the food that they are generating and consuming. And then to throw on top another buzzword that gets used in this field is hazard mitigation. And hazard mitigation differs from climate mitigation in that, again, climate mitigation is really actions that address the drivers of climate change, and hazard mitigation falls more in line a bit with adaptation, and that we are trying to address the impacts of hazards. So hazards being coastal storms, erosion, flooding, and things of that nature. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the issue of climate change can be very overwhelming and seem like a really daunting task to address, an issue to overcome, because the scale of the problem is global, and there are so many impacts and so much that we know and so much that we don't know that it can be really difficult to understand where to even begin to address these issues. And like was already said, a lot of people, when confronted with climate change and the impacts that we're expecting to see, sort of throw their hands up in the air and think, well, it's just too big of a problem. What can we really do about it? But I think from a municipal standpoint, as Karina and Leah were mentioning, there are a lot of opportunities associated with climate change. And the beauty of the problem is that we don't have to tackle it all at once, and we don't have to come up with these big, grand plans that address the issue and the challenges all at once. We can do it sort of piecemeal on an incremental level, and we can do it through municipal actions that are already taking place. So ensuring that municipal fleets are energy efficient, ensuring that our land use planning regulations protect development from the hazards that we can expect. Something as sort of simple as ensuring that our zoning allows for the development of solar arrays where we need them to be placed in a community, or ensuring that developments are considering future projected increases in precipitation when they're designing their stormwater management strategies. So there are a lot of different things that can be considered small actions that, when taken together, add up to have a really significant impact in an individual municipality and in the state as a whole. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand it back off to Karina.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to take a slide and a couple of moments to remind you that Kennebunkport is already taking the first steps towards this climate mitigation and adaptation effort. You're not starting from ground zero. And here's a list of all the actions that have been taken place in the past few years or are currently ongoing. As Lori mentioned, the integration of climate change considerations into the Kennebunkport comprehensive plan process. In 2019, a UNH Sustainability Fellow finished your first municipal greenhouse gas inventory. Abby and our colleagues at SMPDC are leading a grant project to assess the sea level rise vulnerability of Kennebunkport and the other towns in our region. This year is planned for an LED streetlight conversion to reduce the energy use of the streetlights in the town. You're currently working on applying for an EDA grant to repair and replace the Cape Porpoise Pier that will take into account sea level rise impacts. You've already started on working with Abby and I in this regional sustainability and resilience program, and also working with Leah and the other folks at KCT, the local schools and nonprofits to address climate change issues collaboratively. But one thing is that, as Lori mentioned at the beginning, these actions aren't currently guided by a particular municipal goals or policies. So these small steps, it's unclear exactly where they're leading. But with goals or policies, these small steps could lead to bigger actions that incorporate adaptation and mitigation into positive plans and investments in Kennebunkport's future. Again, going back to where I started of what do you want Kennebunkport to be in 2050 or in 2100? And so with that, I think we'll turn it over to Lori.
I got a question. I'm sorry, but I do. And the thing that strikes me in all of this is that everything that we do, I think, is positive in the town. No question, none whatsoever. But we're probably 1/1,000,000th or less of the efforts of the environment in the world. So would you say that our best path forward is barriers and raising, like we're doing at the pier, we're fixing the pier and so forth? Downtown, it's going to be more and more flooding. So are we talking between, let's say, 2030 and 2050, like putting dikes up and putting things up on piers and so forth, barriers and so forth, along with everything else? There's no question about we need to do other things, but we're talking about, if I read everything correctly on what I just saw, we're talking the destruction of downtown Kennebunkport. If nothing radically changes by 2050. Is that correct?
Well, I think this is something, and Leah and Karina, I'm sure, can jump in here as well, but as was touched on earlier, that the issue of climate change and the impacts that we're expected to experience we know for a fact that we are locked into certain impacts. And
that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yep.
Is that we need to do these things. We need to do solar. I don't know about wind, but we need to do the very, fuel efficient vehicles and so forth. But we'll do all that. Let's say we do all that, and we're such a small microcosm of the world. We still have to do something to protect ourselves against rising water, which would mean things like barriers and raising things up or moving, either one. I mean,
And Mike, I think that you're right in that you have to kind of plan for the worst and plan for how you can.
Exactly. I agree. That's all I'm trying to say. Same.
Yeah, and so that's like when we're doing our infrastructure planning, and that's why we're looking at our wastewater and you know, Dock Square. In the
Yeah.
village parcel committees, we had conversations about
Okay.
what is the village parcel our next Dock Square if that got flooded out, and we would hope that that would not happen, and I think we should be working to take actions to minimize that, but the reality is we will be impacted somewhat. It's just a degree of how much.
So
You have so many other countries in the world that are so far behind, and they're like China, for instance. I mean, look what they've done. I mean, they're an industrial country, and they're, you know, you look at some of their cities, and you can hardly see the clouds. You know, you can see clouds, but they're not clouds.
exactly. Yeah.
So how do you get them on board? Those are the people you have to get on board to really make a huge difference. I don't see how we're going to make a very much of a difference if we don't.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the Kennebunkport Climate Initiative,
Sure.
Leah?
I think you're welcome to, Alan.
No, I thought I was agreeing that we should hear.
No, I know. I think so. Number one, you guys are right. You're right. It's gonna take a global effort. But I also think that if every single human sits here and says, well, it's going to take somebody else to do it, then none of us are going to do it, right? We all need to step up. We all need to take those steps forward. And one of the things, I'll talk a little bit about the climate initiative in a little bit, but I'll give you a heads up now, is that they're working to create grassroots movements through youth. And actually, it's been proven to be pretty successful. Some of the changes that happened just in the past 2 years from the class that we were running at the high school have been phenomenal, including getting the Conservation Trust off the grid, including some really important conversations with local community members, lobstermen, and business owners, with the students working together on mitigation projects. So I think that, yes, we do need to come to the table with China. China actually is putting a ton of money into green infrastructure right now. That's where they are focused. So on an international scale, I think they are very forward thinking about that. No politics involved, just what I've seen on as far as their numbers go. But I think, yes, it is a global problem, but if we all say it's a global problem and somebody has to solve it, we're going to be in the same position, and my kids will be sitting here at my age having far worse issues, saying we were talking about this when I was in middle school. So I think we have to start somewhere, and Kennebunkport Climate Initiative is all about creating the grassroots movement nationally, and that's what we're working towards. Our goal is to reach 10 million youth in 5 years. It's a little bit ambitious, but we're going to do it. And I think starting these, we are one small town, but we are the same small town that is everywhere. And if we can start somewhere and show that we can be on the map as an example of how you can both adapt to climate change and mitigate climate change, and we can show that you can do it in your town by bonding together with your community, figuring out what you need and what's important to your community, then we can be an example for everyone else doing it. And I think that, I don't think that's far-fetched. And I think that we all need to start somewhere, and why not here?
So Leah, you would see then what I think I've been saying is that it'd be a two-pronged attack. I agree with it. We have to do everything you're saying, and we really got to do it. And even if we're 1/1,000,000th of something, we need to do it. But by the same time, to be realistic, by 2030 and maybe 2040, we've got a problem of being inundated with water from rising tides. And so the two-pronged thing would be, yes, mitigation of the current situations, but we also got to protect ourselves. And
I would agree with
now
that.
we're talking big bucks. I mean, but you either do it or you don't. It's going to cost you big bucks either way. And that's all I'm saying. I agree 100% that we got to do something, but it's going to take a lot of years. So I'm really taken by the pictures that you've shown of where the beach erosion and the beach and the water inundation and so forth is, because it's consistent with 10 years ago. So anyway, I appreciate everything you're saying. I really do. We got to do it.
So do we want to go to the next slide? I'm not sure how many slides you have for me. So this is one of the things we've talked about in terms of where do we begin? And I think that, like most problems in the world, no matter how big or small, they really happen at the local level. And that's why I've devoted my life and career to local government, because that's where people care the most, and that's where action is easiest to have happen. So to begin with, I think that we would start by picking the low-hanging fruit. And Corinna was kind enough to show you some of the things that we've already done. But I think that you develop some goals and you look for opportunities. Sometimes opportunities because you find a good partner, or you find some funding, or because the time is right. So we certainly start there. We also build on our current successes. So what things are we doing now that are working, and how can we build off of them? So certainly the desire in the community for recycling and composting, how does all this education work? One of our successes, I would say, is the Conservation Trust and the Climate Initiative. Most communities do not have that in their backyard, and we are very fortunate to have them as a partner. So then we talk about integrating policies and programs into work plans. So what that means is that these are our goals. They become part of our everyday life. It's not a special thing that you do. So if I decide as a young couple, I want to send my kids to college, or I want to buy a house, I don't one day wake up and have the money to do that. It's by little measures that I integrate in my life. I don't have coffee out every day. We make sure that we're, conservative in terms of our budgeting, and that we put a little money aside every day. And then one day we wake up and we've made progress on that mountain. And the same things here. We have to be talking about it. We have to have departments that are thinking about it. So when we do a municipal project, whether it be a new building or whether it be a road infrastructure, that we're thinking about how does energy efficiency play into that? How does hazard mitigation play into that? And how can we tick off these goals as we make new projects happen? And then, of course, finding opportunities to leverage. So right now, we're looking at some of our partners tonight who did the presentation with us, both KCI as well as our regional partners amongst the 5 other towns. And we, I always say they're front burner projects and back burner projects, and you keep them all lit, but opportunities arise where that back burner project comes to the front. And so I think we need to always be kind of juggling what's on the front burner and what's on the back burner. So one of the things I wrote in my memo was, it's important as the selectmen set goals to really check in with what the community and the citizens think are priorities as well. So our growth planning committee did survey citizens in preparation for our 2022 comprehensive plan. And you'll see some of those facts that came back. To me, it was very astounding how important natural resources and the environment was to our residents. So we asked them about their town priorities over the next 5 to 10 years. The number one priority that came back was the preservation of natural resources and the environment. In terms of preserving and supporting the fishing industry, is 95% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed. Should we plan for local impacts of sea level rise? 77% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed. Should we reduce energy consumption of town-owned facilities? 85% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed. Municipal sustainability means, and we gave them the definition of what that means, the town should develop a sustainability plan, and 82% of respondents agreed. So again, these are the people who responded to the survey. It wasn't every single person in town, but you don't normally see these kind of numbers, I would say, over and over again. And so I think the citizens are certainly behind us in moving forward in this direction. So the other thing in terms of how would we work, and so we've come up with this diagram to look at. So the selectmen and the town goals, whatever they may be, we always have partners and people who are making those happen. And so in this particular scenario, I have highlighted some of the partners who would be specifically helping us with those goals. So those include municipal operations, the thing we've talked about in terms of how each and every department makes decisions on their operations and their budget. And so those are reflective of those goals. Where our Conservation Commission has been active in both the solar panels on the fire station, as well as, preserving our fishing industry. But there's certainly more work and strategic goals that they could feed into that. We've talked a little bit about the K-Port Climate Initiative, and they're a great partner, both in terms of education and resources, but also projects. Our Solid Waste Committee is working on a recycling plan that also includes ways to reduce waste and contribute in a positive measure towards these goals. The same with our Lighting Committee. We've now purchased our street lights and looking at bringing LED and bringing our energy consumption down. Our Southern Maine Planning Development Corporate Commission partners are our Regional Sustainability and Resilience Program, and that goes in tune with our other 5 towns in our group. The Growth Planning Committee is currently working on the next comprehensive plan, and they've tried to integrate that they will include climate change, resilience, sustainability as part of the future chapters. And we also have RSU 21, as they are half of our budget. They also need to include these strategic goals as part of not only their education and how they support that with the students with the climate initiative, but also in terms of their facilities. And we also have on here our residents and businesses, because certainly, you talk about how we are going to be 1/1,000,000th of fixing the problem, but the municipal operations are not the only thing. It's what each resident and business does, and it really sustains our tourism industry and our business opportunities and our residents who have those shorefront homes.
I have no idea what happened there, but my slide did not work correctly. Basically, our mission is threefold. We seek to educate, empower, and activate youth. And so our goal is through education, introducing them to some of the issues, but then empowering them by showing them the issues that are in their local community. Because so often students are taught about environmental issues, or as was stated earlier, or these huge global issues that they feel they can't do anything about, and that's crippling. So you never want to present people with a problem and then don't give them any ways that they can start solving that problem. So what we do with the community, the youth, is that we create sort of a general education about what's happening and what are the causes as far as the emissions and things like that. And then we talk about what they can see in their own backyard. We let them identify it, let them figure it out, let them see the changes, let them interview community members to see what changes those community members have seen. And then we engage them in an action project. So the action projects that these kids are working on right now, the original one was the aging cable under the water for Goat Island is starting to fail. And so seeing if there's a possibility of getting Goat Island off grid so that we can have renewable energy. And it was sort of a backdoor to discussing all different kinds of things that are happening in our state. They are also doing beach monitoring at Wells Beach and Goose Rocks Beach and adding to the state data. They are also doing Phragmites research on the marsh on Langsford Road. So they're studying both the town property and a Kennebunkport Conservation Trust property and seeing how far the Phragmites is expanding and seeing what effects that's going to be having on the biodiversity of the grasses and the shell life and fish life there. So the kids are actually getting out into their community and doing something, collecting real science data, doing real science projects, and working towards coming up with solutions in their own backyard. And it gives them a real sense of empowerment. They have presented to the community. They have had conversations with Lori and Werner, and in fact, Town Works came in and this is one of my favorite stories, but the kids, as anybody who's ever had a high schooler knows, they know everything there is to know in the world. And they think that we don't know anything. And so the kids were kind of getting irate about, well, why aren't you just building the roads up 3 feet? And, you know, very kindly, you know, someone said, well, because that would create a moat in front of somebody's house. And then that's not really a good thing. And what ended up happening was the kids stood around a map with Lori and Public Works and Werner, and they were looking at all the different issues in the town, and the kids recognized that these are muddy, complex, complicated situations. They're not easily solved. They're not going to be solved with one silver bullet. They're just not going to. But that if we work together and we understand the complexity of it, we understand it from those three lenses, like I talked about earlier, the economic, the sociocultural, and the ecological, that we can come to some solutions and we can come to ideas that might get us in that right direction. So what we recognized is that by empowering these students and activating them within their communities, they became very engaged, and it engaged the community members. All of the people that they spoke with, interviewed, filmed, that came to their events, they started a conversation, and an important one. It's not about right or wrong. It's not about political party. It's about starting a conversation about what we want to see in our future and starting a conversation about really rebuilding our community the way we want to see it and protecting our future for these kids. You know, yes, I may not be here in 2050. I might not, but my kids will be here. And all these students that I've taught through the years are going to be here. And so it's really important to recognize that we are stewards of this land and we're passing this on to someone else, and we should work together and engage their voices. So that's our goal here at Kennebunkport Climate Initiative. We are really putting Kennebunkport on the map as far as hopefully being a shining jewel of what can be when you engage the entire community as a whole in a conversation that needs to be had. So you can find out more information. That's our website. I did have another little slide in there, but somehow it got messed up. But we are looking forward to partnering with community members and the town, and hopefully starting more mitigation projects.
Done a really great presentation, both Leah, Abby, and Karina. And we really appreciate you coming. Now, I think, do the selectmen have any comments or any more ideas or anything?
Well, that's certainly a lot to digest. And Leah, I do thank you and the others. And I don't mean to, you know, when I talked to you earlier, I don't mean to be confrontational or to say that I don't agree with the things that you say. I just want to put it out there that sometimes we get information from sources, and I know we all mean well, but they might not always be the correct answers. But there's definitely something going on in the Gulf of Maine. I would never deny that.
Leah, I think that the program is terrific, and even though I said that we're 1 million, I don't even know what our percentage of the problem is. We need to do something. So I think this is a great program, and I've always been behind everything that the Conservation Trust does. Everything, and this is terrific. Thank you.
You know, maybe sometime when we start to look at our budget for the next year, is that we could start talking about some of these things, because some of these things are going to cost some money. But I mean, there's things that we replace, on a yearly or every 3 or 4 year basis, like, our police cars. Maybe we could start with, some electric cars, something like that, if that's feasible. Maybe looking at for some solar for our municipal buildings. Maybe there might be some grant money out there somewhere, things like that.
That's a good idea, Alan.
What's that?
I said that's an excellent idea. We've talked, at least pre-COVID about building a new town hall in the future. And then, we'll see when that plays out. But certainly seeing if we couldn't make that, I don't know if we could make it 100% green, but, incorporating that into our plans as we move forward.
So, I mean, when we start to do our budget again, I think that we should think about these thoughts.
So this was a lot of information for you guys to absorb, and my hope is that we could come forward with some goals and strategies that would be a beginning step for us. As I mentioned, Corinna did a spreadsheet for all our communities, the 6 towns, and there were 11 different topic areas, and the strategies totaled over 200 strategies. So when you look at it, it's like, oh my gosh, where do I begin? But I would like us to be more thoughtful about where we're putting our energy and funds, and that, we're giving direction to committees and staff that is the goals and the path that you guys would like to see us go down. And so, I'd like us, Werner and I, to bring forward some thoughts on that for your consideration. And Werner's been very patient, like a good man, waiting for the women to be done. I don't know if he has anything to add.
He's muted. Oh, there he is.
There you go.
Yeah, no, I'll second what Lori has said. We got together with this, pretty big list of things that, as a community we need to look at and that we need to potentially address. And it's an overwhelming list, and I do think that, we need some direction, as we move forward and into the future, as far as where our priorities, should be, and just to have some direction. And so I think that's a big part of, what the goal was for this evening, was to hopefully give everybody a base of understanding that, that this is a complicated and a muddy issue, and that it affects all aspects, of, our municipal operations and budgets and strategies. And so, hoping just that everybody gets a baseline understanding of what we're dealing with, and so that as we bring forward, strategies and questions, that, that we're all on the same page.
So, Lori, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're asking for the board to go ahead and ask you and Werner to be able to bring something forward to us to start this off in the near future?
Well, I'm suggesting that is one outcome of tonight, unless you guys have some strategies and goals you want to get down on paper for us right now. But I
I'd
just
like to
wanted
see.
to
Go
let you
ahead.
know you have 2 of the public who have had their hand raised in the participants panel too.
Okay, well, who are they?
Paul Hogan and David James.
Who wants to go first? Raise your hand.
Paul's at the top of the list.
There you go. Paul, there you go.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Oh, great. Hey, great presentation. Thanks to everybody. Just 2 quickies, a comment and a question. The question I've been wanting to hear the answer for several years. The comment is first about China. And now they're getting 32% of their energy from solar. We're at 12.1%. Of course, they have a huge population compared to ours, but they are like, I mean, not only do they produce every solar panel for this country, but they've taken it to heart. They understand. They've canceled tons of coal plants, but they are well on their way. And I think they also have the different kind of economy. They can do whatever they want, move in whatever direction they want instantly, but that's what they're doing. But my question for Ed is, I used to sit on the beach in the evening here with my kids, and we would count the lobster buoys, hundreds of them. It was great math practice. We would do multiplication. We'd play all kinds of games with those lobster buoys. Now, when you sit on Goose Rocks in the evening, there's not one. And,
What end of the beach are you on? The western end or the eastern end?
yeah,
The western.
both ends. I had the same discussion with.
I think a lot of it is economic. As I was saying, the lobsters have spread out across the Gulf of Maine. And so a lot of guys just don't fish inside. And when I say inside, I'm talking under 20 fathoms, 120 feet. When I first started lobstering back in the early 90s, I used to haul in the Goose Rocks where you're talking about every day, and I could catch a pound to a trap, which was pretty good for a one-night set. But the big lobsters seem to have moved out of there. I think they've been displaced by the juveniles. So for 12 years, I did juvenile lobster research with the Maine Department of Resources. And the last time I was in there was probably about 6-7 years ago, and we would fish these traps that every lobster that went in would stay. They didn't have vents in them, so the little ones couldn't escape, and we'd count them. We were averaging 76 lobsters to a trap on a 3-night set. That is an insane amount of lobsters. It's what's called a nursery. So there is no shortage of lobsters at least in 5 years ago in Goose Rocks.
Also, technology has driven a lot of the boats offshore. They have bigger boats, bigger engines, more
They just can't
capabilities.
fish in there.
And they make more money when they go offshore.
So it's not warm water. We could never swim at Goose Rocks on July 4th. Now everybody's in the water, and everybody's assumed it's because of warm water.
No, I think that may actually have played to the benefit of the little lobsters.
Thanks.
David James is up next.
You there, Dave? There he is.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. First of all, I just wanted to thank Karina, Abby, and Leah for a really informative presentation. I thought it was great. Yeah, I applaud. Secondly, I just wanted to give you some firsthand information. We moved to Kennebunkport 23 years ago, bought a property right here on Mass Cove in downtown Kennebunkport. For the first 10 years, the tide in Mass Cove usually ranges between 4 and 8 feet, depending on the time of year, phase of the moon, and so forth. If we have a nor'easter, it maybe gets up to 10 feet. But during the first 10 years we were here, we rarely had any water come into the front yard. And we have a lot of trees right down within 20 feet of Mass Cove. A couple small willow trees we planted 20 years ago, 2 big pine trees, one of them 4 foot in diameter, and another one about 3 feet in diameter. Over the last 6 or 8 years, we've started to get increasing amounts of water coming in there. This past year, we had up as much as 14 inches of salt water halfway up the front yard. And as a result of that, that big 4 foot diameter pine tree totally died. And Werner is well aware of that because we just had it taken down. The willow trees are totally dead. Salt fermentation into the ground is killing off the other big pine tree. Haven't taken that down yet, but I can imagine over the next year or two, there are going to be 3 or 4 big trees that we have to take out because they've died because of the salt water coming in there. So firsthand witnessing to the fact sea level is rising, and each year it's a little bit more than it was the year before. So, but again, thanks for the presentation.
Thanks, Dave. Is there any more hands up?
No more hands up.
Okay. So, Laurie, what do you think? You and Warner are gonna bring some stuff back to the board for us to look at?
If that's the desire of the board.
What do you think, board members?
Can we bring recommendations as well?
Sure. Sure we can.
Absolutely.
More the merrier.
Good.
Sheila, you haven't said a word.
I have, okay, are there any scientists that are looking into the flow of the Gulf Stream? Meaning, if you go down to Cape Cod and you go down to Hyannis, Craigville Beach area, that water's warm. It's been warm for the last 20, well, more like 50 years now, because that's where I was when I was young. And is there any talk about that stream maybe veering over, which is causing the warmer water to come up into the main?
The Gulf Stream does not come into the Gulf of Maine. It travels outside of us. It goes up the
Well, if
eastern edge of Nova Scotia.
if- Cape Cod.
Cape Cod is not in the Gulf of Maine.
No, I know.
Not
I know that, but that's where the warm water is. So I'm saying, could there possibly be a shift in that warm water stream, which is causing it to bypass Cape Cod and heading up into Maine? Just what I'm saying is there's so many things that are out there that could be part of this whole warming thing that is not part of what we're doing to the environment, but is cyclical to the changes in our environment. Just a point of view.
Thanks, Sheila. Ed?
I think we should buy some Teslas. And I'm not joking. Seriously, I think we should invest in some electric vehicles for the town. I've thought that for a long time, but I didn't want to be laughed off the board when I said it.
How about you, Pat? I haven't heard a word from you all night.
Well, I've been listening to everything and there's a lot to digest. Going forward, I think we need to help Laurie because she's got the basis of a very good plan going forward to start addressing the things that we know are coming. And if you take the small steps now, you don't have to take big steps down the road. And so, I'm thinking at the end of the summer, if we could have an annual recap, summary, or report, whatever you want to call it, of what goes on during the year, because when budget season comes, we don't have time to do anything else. And so you got to set up a schedule that allows for these ebbs and flows. So Laurie can put together something, I think, going forward that we can work on. So if we do a little bit about these things every year, we will get a lot done in due time.
I agree, Pat.
How about you, Mike?
I agree.
Okay. So we're all in agreement.
That was a great presentation.
That was.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
did a
so
great
I would
job.
just really like to thank Leah and Corinna
Leah
and
wants to say
Abby.
something.
Something.
I just want to say one thing, the fire chief in Kennebunk just bought a Tesla and it was because of the students and the impact they had on him. But he's the first fire department in the United States to have a Tesla.
Really?
And he loves it and he said it's worth it and it didn't cost any more than it would have to get one of the big trucks that they were planning on getting. So I'm just throwing it out there.
Leah, we have a
Definitely gonna
mutual
look at that.
friend who has one and he let me drive it. I'm hooked.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
For-
Pat.
In fact, Paul Hogan has one. Maybe he'll bring it to one of the meetings and let us drive it. Right, Paul? Got his hand up.
You want to take Paul's comment?
Not only will I let you drive it, Ed, but I'll give you a referral code. So
No, that's what my friend said. I think I'm a commodity now. But in my price bracket, I'm going to have to buy a used one.
Here's one is good too.
Okay.
Thank you. So thanks again. and for this nice presentation. Is there anything else you want to add, Laurie, before we move on?
No, we'll bring back some goals and strategies, but certainly if people have thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you very much.
Okay.